This is GTV. Back to basics. Five years ago, I made a video covering the Phantasy Star series, as the original entry passed the 30-year mark. It was a fun, interesting retrospective that covered everything. I followed things up with deep dives on Phantasy Star 2 and 3 later on. Someday, I'll cover Phantasy Star 4. Don't worry. 2017 wasn't the end of Phantasy Star, as the story still continues to this day. New releases have hit the stores. Unknowns, both known and unknown, were discovered. Then it hit me that the original Phantasy Star needs its own dedicated video. So, let's do just that, and celebrate the start of this great series. Hold on to your Laerma nuts, because Phantasy Star 1 is 35. It's hard to believe that we're moving through the third decade of life during and after the 8-bit era. 1987 seems so long ago when you look at the calendar, but thinking about those days gone by, it feels like only yesterday. The story of how the game Phantasy Star came to be is quite interesting. Truly a moment when the state-of-the-art met a sign of the times. Back in 1987, Sega Enterprises, in Japan, released the fourth iteration of its 8-bit hardware, the Master System. The long road began with the SG-1000 in July 1983, released on the same day as the rival Nintendo family computer. The next year, the exterior was redesigned, becoming the SG-1000 II. Those internals were upgraded in 1985, becoming the Mark III. This machine outperformed the family computer in many important areas, with more colors and more RAM that could bring many of Sega's early 80s arcade games home. Sega still had one more upgrade with the FM sound card, which gave games an amazing boost in audio that made the low-quality beeps and boops sound like they were coming out of a high-end synthesizer. This accessory could attach to the Mark III and was built in to the next upgrade, codenamed Mark IV and known to the public as the Master System. Named so because Sega intended this to be the highest, ultimate, final iteration of 8-bit technology. You may question the need to have 4 machines come out over the course of 4 years, with the fifth, the Mega Drive, landing in 1988. But it was the bubble era in Japan, where money was practically falling out of the sky. Putting down 15,000 yen was nothing. Cantaloupes cost more than that. Combine that with the rapid jumps in technology that made this year's model obsolete overnight, and it just made sense to drive this cycle. After all, when everything is made in Japan anyway, the money always comes back home in the end. While Sega was in the middle of all of this, Nintendo, with the family computer, was conquering the TV game market in Japan. Famicom, a contraction of family computer, became the shorthand for all video games. Many new companies sprung up to get on the bandwagon, one of which, Enix, started out as an obscure real estate company that suddenly ran a lateral to start making games and get that money. The company struck gold in 1986 with Dragon Quest. The title brought the role-playing genre to the living room, forcing space shooters and simple action games to move over and make some room. It wasn't long until a flood of RPGs hit the scene. Of course, I'm not neglecting that the genre had been flourishing in the PC space for some time, but the affordability of the family computer created much more access to RPGs than ever before. The concept of Phantasy Star began to materialize in the early weeks of 1987, just as Dragon Quest II hit the store shelves. Programmers Yuji Naka and Kotaro Hayashida, aka Osao Kota, expressed interest in creating an RPG that would give the Mark III something special that could stand out, grabbing attention away from the popularity of Dragon Quest. A team comprising 10 of Sega's best and brightest would get to work on this new game. Kotaro Hayashida would take on the role of planner and scenario writer. Chieko Aoki would join him in writing the game's story, much of which was completed independently prior to her entering the project. Her vision of the game was a futuristic sci-fi adventure with spaceships, aliens, and lasers. Rieko Kodama was drafted as the main designer, creating many of the characters seen in the game. Joining her was Naoto Oshima, the future creator of Sonic the Hedgehog. In his first outing, Yuji Naka assumed the role of lead programmer. Yuji was also responsible for creating the name Phantasy Star, taking the word fantasy from the song Nagisa no Fantasy, performed by Noriko Sakai. Rieko Kodama changed the spelling from F to PH, as she felt that the F spelling cast the image of a medieval European setting, while Phantasy Star was meant to be something different. The soundtrack was composed by Tokiko Uwabo, often referred to as Bo for short. Nearly 20 compositions were created for the various towns, dungeons, and battles encountered in the game, striking the right mood for each situation. Miki Morimoto, aka Gamer Mickey, was tasked with creating the statistics and mathematical rules that the game would operate under. Truly the unsung hero of any RPG. Mickey decided how many hit points each enemy had, or how much experience the player needed to reach the next level. The team behind Phantasy Star was given relative creative freedom for their project. The team created the game on their own terms, which was embarked upon with only a few vague goals, namely to be the most visually impressive role-playing game on the market, and not to be labeled as just another clone of Dragon Quest. Despite wanting to run counter to the most popular RPG out there, the staff used Dragon Quest II as a basis for inspiration, often playing the game in the Sega offices. This ensured that the game mechanics would be familiar, and that ideas were kept separate and original by making sure nothing too similar accidentally slipped in. The story of Phantasy Star takes place in the Andromeda Galaxy, centuries in the future. There resides a star system named Algol, with 3 planets: Palma, a highly advanced Earth-like world, filled with humans and advanced technology; Motavia, a barren desert with no natural rainfall, natively inhabited by small, furry creatures; and Dazorus, a distant frozen world with sparsely populated inhabitants who are tall and green, with a penchant for lying. In the year AW 342, a king named Lashik rules over the system. Once a kind leader, his reign led to the introduction of a high-tech police state. A group of rebels led by Nero Landale investigate Lashik and his rise to power. One day, Nero gets too close to the truth and is caught by the robot police force. His sister, Alisa, comes to Nero's aid, but it's too late. He passes on to her his sword and his mission to overthrow Lashik and restore peace to Algol. In his dying words, Nero speaks of a warrior named Tyrone who might be able to help. Setting out on her mission, Alisa finds help from local Palmanians who offer guidance, support, and shelter. She travels to planet Motavia and discovers a talking cat, Meow. This animal belongs to Tyrone, but when the two confronted Medusa, the strong man was turned to stone. The bottle around Meow's neck can de-petrify his owner. Alisa and Meow travel back to Palma and rescue Tyrone, who was in search of Medusa's axe, a weapon that could be used to defeat Lashik. Back on Motavia, the 3 seek out the help of a powerful Esper, Lutz, who joins the fight. With the party assembled in full, the 4 explore Palma and Motavia inside out. With the help of Dr. Luvino and his robot Hapsby, who is hard-headed, they are able to travel to Dazorus as well. Along the way, the secrets of Lashik are revealed. The king has fallen under the spell of a pure incarnation of evil, the Dark Force. This demon has one weakness: Laconia, the hardest substance that exists in Algol. With the right weapons forged from Laconia, Alisa, Meow, Tyrone, and Lutz can fight the Dark Force head-on and save the Algol star system. The graphics of Phantasy Star were intended to show off the power that the Mark III had over the family computer. Overworld maps are bright and colorful, often with animation on screen, such as the waves of a coastline, boiling lava, or moving walkways between towns. In battle, each enemy has its own unique movements, a programming trick that was done by having the non-active part of that object drawn as the background, with the parts in motion as the sprite. The most recognizable feature of Phantasy Star is the 3D scrolling dungeon. Rather than a top-down view seen in other RPGs, the player is presented with a head-on view. The effect was Yuji Naka's personal design, where the ceiling and walls are a singular drawn object on screen, overlaid onto a colored background. During the play-testing stage, the scrolling moved much more quickly, and was forced to be slowed down after some who tested the mazes, including Yuji himself, suffered from motion sickness while playing. Phantasy Star would use an internal battery to save game data. Dragon Quest I and II used lengthy passwords to save progress. Final Fantasy, which often gets a head-to-head comparison with Phantasy Star, has only one save file in the game. Phantasy Star offered 5 of them. As well, the player could save anywhere, in towns, on a map, or in a dungeon, without the need to march back to a certain spot in the game each time. In addition to swords, guns are equipable in the game. There's a strategy behind them, as each level of gun can attack enemies a set number of times for a set number of hit points. In some cases, they give you a more powerful attack than your current sword, and sometimes less. Unlike Dragon Quest, a few commands are automatic, meaning you don't need to bring up the action menu. Unlocked doors automatically open. To talk to townspeople, you just walk right up to them. When you do access the menu, a scenic view of the area you're in is shown on screen, rather than a black background. Compared to other role-playing games released in and around 1987, Phantasy Star is one of the stronger ones, in terms of graphics and gameplay, that still holds up today. Compared to most RPGs that came afterwards, the game lacks in a few areas. The battles feature only one enemy type at once. Often there are multiples of the same enemy. You can't select which enemy to attack. Often you'll find yourself in a situation where an enemy has 1 or 2 hit points left, but in the next round of battle, another enemy gets attacked instead. And that low hit point enemy that should have been taken out easily gets in one more attack. So unfair. The 3D mazes are a sight to behold, but they are, without a doubt, the most difficult part of the game. It is very easy to get lost. There is no way to know where you are or where to go. You don't even know what floor you're on, and often find yourself repeating the same steps over and over. Oh, and don't forget, if you're backed up against the wall and get into a battle, you cannot escape, which meant a lot of game overs. All in all, Phantasy Star was an amazing package that was beyond what any RPG fan could ever expect in 1987, featuring an amazing detailed story, great visuals, and a full soundtrack. The final version of the game weighed in at 4 megabits, 8 times the size of the first Dragon Quest, 4 times the size of the second, and twice as big as the first Final Fantasy. After almost a year in development, Sega was now ready to present its own take on the RPG, and present it to the world.
Sega はロールプレイングゲームも変えてしまう。ファンタシースター。かつてない驚異のグラフィック。壮大な SF ストーリー。その秘密は4メガ。ファンタシースター。
On December 20th, 1987, Sega released Phantasy Star for the Mark III and Master System in Japan. The release came only a few days after Squaresoft's Final Fantasy for the family computer. Though both games are different from each other in many ways, the fact that the two were created and released around the same time often led to comparisons, both in presentation, expectations, and sales. As well, both games were released under the shadow of Dragon Quest III, which would arrive less than 2 months later. Sales-wise, Phantasy Star did not break any records in Japan. The user base of the Mark III and Master System was only a few 100,000, while that of the family computer was in the millions. Still, Phantasy Star ranked in Sega's top 10 sales charts and stayed there throughout 1988. Sega managed to get some positive press for Phantasy Star. Beep magazine previewed the game in November 1987. The article explained basic game mechanics, plot points, and boasted about the 4 megabit cartridge size. Due to long lead times that print media must endure, work-in-progress screenshots were used that show a few different graphical elements that were changed by the time the game was finished. In February 1988, Famicom Tsushin magazine gave an in-depth walkthrough of Phantasy Star in its Masters Club column. Maps for the first few dungeons were featured, as well as item lists for shops and a few hints and strategies when starting out the game. The column ends with a call for submissions to draft the story of Phantasy Star 2. In the United States, Sega was fighting an uphill battle against Nintendo, who was able to run away with the market thanks to more software, better games, and wider distribution overall. When released in the fall of 1988, Phantasy Star was not only one of the largest and most advanced games available in America, it was the only turn-based RPG that existed, while at the same time, the most expensive game on the market with a price tag of $70. The English localization made a few changes to the script. Alisa was renamed Alice, Tyrone became Odin, and Lutz, Noah. The Dark Force was known as Dark Falls, and most other characters also received changes that fit English spelling rules. Spell names were changed to simple English words. The healing items, Perorimate and Ruoginin, became Cola and Burger. Other changes are accurate, although some spellings are altered to fit the constraints of the program. Reviews came in soon after release. Every non-Nintendo magazine out there gave Phantasy Star high praise and a lot of free publicity. In September 1988, the game was reviewed by Electronic Game Player, a forerunner to Electronic Gaming Monthly. The review declared Phantasy Star a direct hit, mentioning that the role-playing game genre was red hot in Japan, and to expect many bestsellers from there to make their way overseas soon. Since there weren't any turn-based RPGs available in America at the time, the review compares and contrasts Phantasy Star to The Legend of Zelda. The next year, after the magazine transitioned into Electronic Gaming Monthly, Phantasy Star was awarded the most challenging game and best graphics in a video game, among those released in 1988. GamePro magazine covered Phantasy Star in their September 1989 issue. The magazine did not issue scores at the time, but instead offered an explanation of the game's play mechanics and offers some advice for the more difficult parts of the game. The article also featured custom-made artwork of Alice and her friends. Video Games and Computer Entertainment magazine offered a review around the same time, stating that Phantasy Star was the most expensive video game ever made, though certainly worth the price. Adding that the game takes weeks to finish, the graphics are some of the best possible, and that the difficulty level is higher than most games. Modern reviews of Phantasy Star still hold the game in high regard, with mostly positive opinions, though functions that have been evolved out of the genre are still criticized. Whatever the score, Phantasy Star is held up universally as the very best Master System game ever made, and the main reason to invest in one. The English translation, sold in America, was released at the same time in Britain, one of the few countries where Sega was far and away the TV game market leader, while Nintendo was barely a blip on the radar. Computer and Video Games magazine gave Phantasy Star a score of 75% in March 1989. Again, The Legend of Zelda is cited as a comparison. The review was positive, other than mentioning that with the steep difficulty curve, it is not recommended for everybody. In a separate buyer's guide published at the end of 1989, the score was revised to 89%. The Sega magazine gave high marks across the board to Phantasy Star in June 1990. The review claims that the game is full of action and there is very little tedious wandering around, concluding with remarks that the game is brilliant and like controlling an interactive movie. In South Korea, the Master System was licensed to Samsung, who distributed all hardware and software in the region under the name Game Boy. In December 1990, Samsung released a Korean-language version of Phantasy Star. The game features unique box art and a redesigned title screen, in addition to the obvious language changes. Phantasy Star received one more international release in 1991, when a Portuguese version was released in Brazil. Sega had always been popular in the country, thanks to local distributor Tectoy. In Brazil, the Master System remained on sale with new releases throughout the 1990s, and is still sold in various forms today. In December 1993, To celebrate the Japanese release of Phantasy Star 4, Sega held a contest giving away 1,000 copies of the original Phantasy Star for the Mega Drive. Though it had been 6 years since the game's first release and the Mark III long discontinued, the original Phantasy Star remained in demand at used game shops, thanks to the later releases in the series maintaining public interest. The game is exactly the same as it was back in 1987. In fact, thanks to the somewhat built-in backwards compatibility the Mega Drive had, the same parts from a Mark III cartridge were put on a Mega Drive board. The response to the contest was so strong that the game was properly put on sale in April 1994. All of these releases made Phantasy Star the first true worldwide role-playing game, with proper releases in Japan, Korea, the Anglosphere, and Brazil. Something that Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy are still working on getting done. In addition to the original releases, which made Phantasy Star one of the most traveled titles in the early days of video games, the classic RPG went through several re-releases. Some were simple ports like those seen on multiple Sega compilations, or services of years gone by, such as the Wii Virtual Console. However, there are 4 remade versions of the first Phantasy Star that are worth knowing about. One isn't even a video game at all. It's a choose-your-own-adventure novel. In 1989, Futabasha Publishing released The Adventures of Alisa, a book that lets the reader play out the events of the first Phantasy Star as a text adventure. Alongside 250 pages of commands and outcomes are many detailed illustrations of key events in the game. The Adventures of Alisa does not stray far from the original story found in the Master System version. However, the extra space provides for more backstory and dialogue between characters. The novel was released alongside a companion tome for Phantasy Star 2. In 2003, Sega launched the Sega Ages 2500 series on the PlayStation 2. This series revived popular Sega games of yesteryear, while completely remaking many of them for the standards of the day, all at a lower price of 2,500 yen, about $20 in 2003. The very first volume of Sega Ages 2500 was a proper remake of Phantasy Star, now subtitled Generation 1. This new version of Phantasy Star features completely redrawn graphics, reflecting a serious sci-fi anime tone, and a reworked soundtrack. The game has been expanded to feature large amounts of dialogue that also relies on keywords and meeting non-playable characters that were not present in the original game. In addition, the battles are reconfigured to allow more than one enemy on screen, with an expanded range of choices in combat. The menus are more helpful, as the items and weapons that appear in the game will indicate what effects they will have and who can use each one, making the shops and equipment upgrades much more bearable than in the original. The game also has a talk function, just like the one used in Phantasy Star 4, that gives the player some extra advice on what the next step of the quest is, either if it's too hard to figure out, or you haven't played the game in a while and forgot what you were doing. The packaging for Phantasy Star Generation 1 contained a special notebook that included an information card with artwork and trivia for the game. This encouraged customers to buy each successive installment and include those information cards in the notebook. Between 2003 and 2008, 33 volumes of Sega Ages 2500 were released in Japan, including Phantasy Star Generation 2 and Phantasy Star Complete Collection. Years later, fan translations in multiple languages appeared for distribution online. Years ago, these were applied as patches to existing game discs that were then burned onto a DVD-R and played on a PlayStation 2 with a region lock bypass. These days, home computers can easily emulate the PlayStation 2 and is the preferred choice for many. Also in 2003, Phantasy Star came to a small set of Docomo Japanese mobile phones. The game is very similar to the original Mark III version, though with a much lower resolution to fit the constraints of the screen. The game was part of an online package called Sonic Cafe that featured scaled-down versions of other popular games, including Puyo Puyo and Nights into Dreams. This was followed up the next year with a second game for a wide variety of mobile phone models, titled Phantasy Star Deluxe Edition. The game is unusual in some ways, being both an upgraded as well as stripped down version of the original game. Character animations were lessened or non-existent. Some spells and weapons don't work, and a few commands were removed entirely. However, the graphics were improved in some places with redrawn sprites. The music is also different, somewhat resembling the rendition from Generation 1. In a time before touchscreens, the game was controlled by the numeric keypad and control arrows that most Japanese mobile phones had at the time. In 2009, the Deluxe Edition was released in China with a full Chinese script. The game has since been translated into English and Portuguese, though finding the proper emulator to play it could be difficult. In the years that followed, the original Phantasy Star series was mostly dormant, relegated to compilation status without much afterthought. But there was one more go-round for Phantasy Star in 2018, when the Sega Ages series was brought to the Nintendo Switch. Much like the original Sega Ages of the 1990s, these versions served as reissues that preserved the original gameplay of beloved classics, while carrying them forward for a new generation, adding modern refinements where needed. This version featured several improvements. Alisa can move on the map at double speed. The party can earn extra experience from enemies, and the number of random battles are reduced. You can turn these features off and play the game 1987 style. There's also the choice of soundtracks, Basic Mark III or the improved FM Master System version, something that was not available in versions outside of Japan. While in Japan, if you had a Master System, you were still stuck with only one kind of music. Display modes are also customizable for a pixel-perfect experience or something that recreates that old analog-style TV. On top of all of that, the greatest improvement to the game is the dungeon map. Now you can finally see where you're going. More than that, there are markers for doors, treasure chests, and traps. When you aren't underground, the map shows you which planet you're on. It might seem redundant, but you never know when you'll need that, and it looks cool anyway. Also on screen, there's a handy sidebar that shows exactly how much HP, MP, and Meseta you have, rather than having to check that over and over through the menu. Other helpful improvements include a list of magic spells, items, and equipment, quickly displaying their effects, or who can use what. When you aren't playing the game, you can sit back and listen to the soundtrack, or flip through the monster guide, covering the stats of each enemy defeated and how many you've gone through so far. With yet another re-release, a new generation has the chance to experience Phantasy Star without the hang-ups that slow the game down, while series veterans can relive their favorite memories all over again, without having to put in 50 hours of time that we just don't have anymore. Will there be more updates in the future as Phantasy Star reaches the 40 and 50 year mark? No one can say for sure, but if that's the case, I'm pretty sure we will all be there to fire up the Luvino all over again.
RPG マジックナイトレイアース。
Here are some of the interesting secrets, quirks, and mistakes that make Phantasy Star everything that it is. There are several places you can get stuck in the game, and unfortunately may have to start over from the beginning. If you last visited a church in Paseo on Motavia and returned there via the fly spell after the spaceport has closed and before getting the Land Rover, you will be stuck forever with no way to escape. In the Dezoris Western Cave, if you take a left turn, you will fall into a trap that you can't climb out of. If you haven't found the flute, or don't have enough magic to cast exit, then you are stuck. If you saved the game while in this cave, well, sorry. After defeating Lashik, you can't return to the ground without Meow, so make sure he stays alive. If somehow he doesn't survive, you then have to rely on Alice's fly spell, or a trancer, and if you're out of those, you're out of luck. Then there are just places in dungeons where you might get trapped behind a wall and can't escape, and you don't have enough hit points, magic, or items to win the battle, and no matter what, you will lose every time. The second-hand shop is a great place to buy and sell items. Usually next to those in each town is a first food shop. Why would it be first? Because you can't resell and buy back food? It's a simple translation error, as it was meant to be written as a fast food shop. They do sell burgers and colas, after all. The mistake comes from the words first and fast being written exactly the same in Japanese. Is Lutz, aka Noah, a man or a woman? In early drafts of the game's script, it wasn't clear, though the in-game text always refers to your fourth character as he. Despite this, in the English version, the governor of Motavia calls Noah her. A big mistake. Most advice comes from helpful townspeople who ask yes or no questions, and when you reply with no, then usually a hint is revealed. In Casbah, on Motavia, one man asks if you know of the hovercraft. Well, if it's your first time playing, and you're being honest, then the answer is no. However, the location of the hovercraft and unlocking access to it is only revealed if you answer yes. But if you already know about the hovercraft, why do you need someone to tell you about it? Maybe it's not the biggest deal, but it always tripped me up every time I play. Hey, is it just me, or does the whole game seem directly lifted from Star Wars? There are stormtroopers, lightsabers, and the Force used in the game. Palma seems a bit like Alderaan, or at least the moon of Endor. Motavia is similar to Tatooine, replete with Jawas, aka Motavians. And the Dazorians look just like the aliens from the Trade Federation. Wait, what? We didn't see those guys until the Phantom Menace? When was that? 1999? Well, okay, never mind. There are 3 non-playable characters in the Japanese version, known as the Sega Sisters. They are based on 3 staff members who worked at Sega and contributed to Phantasy Star: Miki Morimoto, Chieko Aoki, and Takako Kawaguchi. Miki, known as Gamer Miki, is found in the town of Sophia on Motavia. In Japanese, she asks if you have a Master System, while in English, she asks if you like Sega games. You had better say yes. Chieko is found in the caves of Dazorus. Chieko's nickname is Tegami Chie, with Tegami being the Japanese word for a written letter. She earned the nickname because she was always quick to respond to intra-office memos. Takako is found in Drazgao on Palma. Her nickname is Choko Onesan, earning the moniker, which means Big Sister, from answering calls at the Sega Joy telephone hotline, always giving helpful advice to kids who need help finishing games. Her contribution to Phantasy Star was the design of Meow. In the English version, only Miki identifies herself by name. In Generation 1, the Sega sisters are renamed to Shinko, Agnes, and Misha. In the Nintendo Switch version of Phantasy Star, the dungeons are accompanied by a map, which makes navigation much easier. Not just to tell you where you're going or where you've been, the maps have icons that explain where locked doors, treasure chests, and traps are, among other things. After the game's ending, there is a staff roll that automatically moves through a unique dungeon. That area also gets its own map, and along with that, a special map icon you can only see here. Alex Kidd appears on the map each time a staff member is credited. A nice touch, as the key staff of Phantasy Star all worked together on Alex Kidd. A nice way to tie together 2 worlds. Speaking of tying worlds together, in an early prototype of the game, the items Master System and Zillion are in the game. Zillion was not only a Mark III game, but a full anime series co-produced by Sega, wherein the Zillion weapon was sold as a laser tag toy and used the same design for the Sega Light Phaser. Since the game was not yet completed at the time, the items have no function and were discarded before the final version. Still, it would have been cool to have this be the name of the laser gun. As an aside, I swear I saw a meow-like animal in the background of the Zillion anime. While the in-game story of Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 3 are a little light, as that's just the way it was back then, there were a few semi-canonical add-ons that Sega created to help bridge the events across the whole series of games. The Sega Players Enjoy Club newsletter featured a manga prologue to Phantasy Star, written by Rie Kodama and Judy Totoya, real name Yasushi Yamaguchi. The prologue was published in 1990 and shows the events of the early life of Lutz, from birth until meeting Alisa. Events during the game and afterward are shown in psychic visions, preparing Lutz for the future, where he fulfills his destiny as the Savior. Later volumes cover events that took place in Algol and on board the Alisa III. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the groundbreaking, trailblazing role that a certain character set in the original Phantasy Star. Meow is not only the first talking cat in RPG history, but the first one that's a playable character as well. Without Meow and his bravery, there may have never been Nyan and Pico in Cosmic Fantasy, or Red 13 in Final Fantasy VII. Just think of all those kittens, present and future, who can grow up with some in-game representation and play characters who look just like them. Thank you, Meow, and Choco One-san for setting us all on the right side of history and ensuring playable character equality.
Okay, now we're talking Thunderblade. One heavily armed attack copter. Evil forces trashing your city. 12 rounds of major air-to-ground destruction. An arcade classic. Allow me. Note my aerial technique. Hey, guys, come on, you'll get your turn.
Thunderblade, just one of 70 games from Sega. And now look for the incredible Phantasy Star. Sega, major fun and games.
Where do they see Phantasy Star?
Sega's Thunderblade, Phantasy Star, and Master System sold separately.
As I was making this video, I had a different ending written out that was full of gamer bromides about Phantasy Star and Sega. When I heard the sad news that one of Sega's best, Rieko Kodama, had passed away, all of the favorites I grew up with and the connections made with the creators on the other side, however slight, through the credits, interviews, news snippets, etc., are starting to weaken, eventually fading away as you realize that these great creative minds are starting to go. Eventually, they'll all be gone, and not long after that, so will you. Contributions that Rieko made to Phantasy Star and many other Sega games are so numerous and important that without her, they just wouldn't be the same. They would be something else. Alex Kidd, Castle of Illusion, Sonic 1 and 2, Skies of Arcadia, the list is too long to mention everything. She left her mark, and you see it clearly in many of these great games. We all live life with the knowledge that everyone we know will die. Yet somehow we manage to conduct our business with this fact in our minds and not panic about it. We mourn at the appropriate time, but outside of that, how we just go on knowing that day will come, but living like that day will never come, has always amazed me. Upon hearing the news, I did what many of you out there did, and went back through some of her older games and played them, celebrating the works of a life that was able to reach us through our favorite medium. But it always comes just a little too late, as if we could just play these games one more time without the sadness of the truth that someone who made these creative works will never come back, giving us just one more go. A slight regret that we didn't appreciate something just a little more while that somebody who gave it to us was still alive. What's left behind is the body of work, something that will live on for us after those creators are long gone. Will these games and the people who made them be forgotten someday? Sadly, yes. So, live life while you can, the way you want. Someday there won't be anything left to do, but hang it up for good and say farewell. Thank you, Phoenix Rie. We won't forget you.